And with that, we are ready to move on to our final discussion for today, and we hope to talk about a sector that is a key industry in Sri Lanka, a growing industry in Sri Lanka, and that is tourism sector. And we have with us Travis Gomez from Frontier Research joining us. A very good evening to you, Travis.
Good evening.
Okay, to start things off, can we talk about what's going on right now in the tourism sector?
So what we've been doing is we've been trying to looking at some of the broad trends that have been going on with regard to the tourism segment. Just to give you an overview of what's been going on in the most recent, in terms of the most recent performance. In 2016, what we saw was that overall there was about tourist arrivals close to 2.05 million, which was a bit below what the government was hoping for. Their target was about 2.2 million. But part of this was also because there was an extraordinary situation in terms of the flooding that took place in around May. So because of that hampered some of the tourist arrivals. And also towards the end of the year, we saw some slowdown in some of the markets, particularly like the Middle East market and the Eastern Europe. The tourist arrivals from there were a bit slow. But overall, what we saw was that despite those things, towards the second half of 2016, there was strong tourist arrivals growth. So for both the third quarter and the fourth quarter, tourist arrivals growth showed double-digit growth. It grew at like 12% year on year. And just moving to the most recent quarter, the first quarter of 2017, there was, as was expected, there was a slowdown because of the maintenance work that was going on at the Colombo International Airport. So as a result of that, the tourist arrivals had kind of slowed down to about 3%, while I think some of the hotels were expecting it to be have a much bigger impact. They were expecting like the tourist bookings to be down by about like 8 to 10%. But if you look at the arrivals, it hasn't been too bad.
Okay, so what are the trends that we observe these days, globally and locally in the sector? Tying into, so in terms of, we are seeing this continued growth in tourist arrivals, but at the same time, what we also see happening is that the sort of the composition of the tourists is also changing. So we are what we are seeing now is a shift from sort of like the traditional markets for tourism to Sri Lanka, which is mainly like UK, Germany, France, mostly European countries. There is now a gradual shift towards more towards regional markets, particularly the Asian markets. Okay.
So currently, like the Asian region accounts for about 47% of tourist arrivals, and within that, the two key markets really are India and China, which are the top two the top two source markets for tourist arrivals in Sri Lanka.
Any reason for this shift?
So one is in terms of global spending power. So in terms of given the slowdown that's been happening in Europe, in terms of the recession, the prolonged recession that has been going on there, as a result, most of the tourists from those markets have kind of been looking for more nearer destinations rather than traveling all the way to Sri Lanka. At the same time, a lot of these markets in China especially are opening up. More people are kind of traveling around, their spending power has improved. So that's one of the reasons why. At the same time, the other thing we've also seen, apart from the usual the tourist arrivals, is there's also been more of sort of what we call MICE tourists, basically people who come for meetings, for conferences, for conventions. That is also like a big area which Sri Lanka has like the position to attract more.
Okay, what we understand also is that many tourists who arrive in Sri Lanka do not spend much time in Colombo. So what is the reason behind it? Is it because it's congested, or is it expensive, or have we not properly positioned Colombo as a tourist destination?
So that's like an interesting point that we've observed in the data, is that if you take for the last 5 years, so a key metric that we are like interested in is what we call this the foreign guest nights. That is basically the number of nights on average tourists spend in the country. So for the last 5 years, it has been sort of fairly stable. It's been around, so for a tourist on average, they spend about 10 nights in Sri Lanka altogether. But at the same time, what we've observed is that the number of days they're spending in Colombo has kind of been trending down. So about 5 years back, it used to be like closer to like 2.6 nights. Now it's come down to around 2.1 nights. Okay, so if you try to like
figure out what are some of the reasons for that. So one reason might be because one reason why a lot of tourists part of the reason why people are spending some time in Colombo might be for those transit purposes. That is, because you need to leave enough time to get yourself to and from the airport.
Yeah.
So, but now with the development of the expressway to the airport plus to the expressway to the south, basically tourists don't need to spend as much time in Colombo for the transit purposes. So given that, so those type of tourists, the need to spend Colombo for something like that is going down. At the same time, this also might reflect the fact that a lot of the tourists are not really aware, or they're not really aware of Colombo as being like a destination as itself. Okay, because if you look at sort of like the popular tourist these destination websites that most of these tourists might be referring to, if you look at they usually like compile these the top 5 things or the top 10 things to do in Sri Lanka. A lot of them don't really feature anything in Colombo. So a lot of tour, so it's not really due to that there isn't unique experiences or unique landmarks to look at in Colombo. It's just that a lot of the tourists are not really aware of that, and also the marketing wise we haven't really positioned it to find it. So that may also be contribute to this drop in the guest.
And we also have a target in tourism to increase the average daily expenditure up to $200 USD. How can we get there? How can we attract the high-end tourists?
So that again also ties into this bringing about this attractiveness of Colombo. So right now it hasn't been, we have been seeing some growth in terms of the tourist, the spending. So about 5-7 years back, it was the average was about each tourist spent about 89 USD. Now it's closer to like 160 USD. So there has been a big improvement, but to get from there even further, what we really need to do is to sort of attract those high spending tourists. So one is that is also naturally coming about because of this shift, as I talked about, the tourist mix. A bit more tourists coming from the regional countries like India and China, they tend to have a higher propensity for spending for things like shopping, and they are sort of like those are like areas that they would focus on more. So in terms of the spending power, that shift is going to help. At the same time, we also want to attract more of these MICE tourists, these people who are coming for these conferences, because a lot of the research shows that their spending power generally tends to be twice as much as people who are coming for tourist purposes. So really, to attract more of them, what we really need is to really position Colombo, because for these conferences and all, ideally they would be coming to Colombo, and they would be
sponsored by their organizations.
Yeah, exactly. So for them to choose Colombo as a destination to have their conference or their meetings, whatever, we need to, because they are going to come here for only a short period of time. They don't have time to like travel around the country. So for them to select Colombo as a destination, you need to have enough attractions within Colombo itself for them to choose Colombo. So attracting more MICE tourists is the way to go, but that means that we have to position Colombo better to attract those type of tourists.
So also, how can we position Sri Lanka as a tourist destination beyond sun and sand? How can we, what are the other aspects that we can look at?
So we need, so that's something in terms of the marketing, also the way we are sort of positioning Sri Lanka, we have to kind of look beyond that, because even if you take tourists from the traditional markets, you can no longer just rely on, especially if you want to get repeat visitors to come, for them to keep coming back to Sri Lanka, just having these, pristine beaches and, focusing exclusively on that resort sort of concept is not enough, because even tourists from those traditional markets, what they are really the focus now is very much on what they would call like experiential tourism, or sort of like this adventure tourism. People are coming here for sort of like to have unique experiences, to interact with the culture, to see sort of like cultural activities, to interact with the local people. So so to get those type of repeat visitors, we can't just be focusing on just on the natural beauty that we have, which is a big draw, but to keep them here, to retain them, we need to focus on that aspect as well.
Okay, as we are also expecting the volume arrivals to increase rapidly, how can we do we have enough capacity in Sri Lanka to accommodate these tourists actually?
Yes, so keeping in line with Colombo, just keeping that focus on Colombo, the reason why what we feel that even tourists like the hotel operators have to be sort of concerned about is because, as I said in the data, the tourists are spending less time in Colombo. But at the same time, what we are observing is that a lot of the new new developments that are happening are centered around Colombo. So within the next 2 to 3 years, about another 1,000 room capacity is going to get added just in Colombo itself. And you've got a lot of these well-known brands coming into Colombo, like the Shangri-La and the Sheraton and the Hyatt. So it's going, in terms of the competitive environment in Colombo, there's going to be a significant, it's going to be much more challenging, which is something really that the local hotel operators also have to pay attention to, because if we look across different types of hotel segments, the city hotels are the ones that have been showing the best performance. So that's because they've been able to attract both the foreign tourists as well as the local tourists for things like, you know, the F&B, the restaurants and all, plus the banqueting facilities. That is one of the reasons why they've been showing the best performance. But now with a lot of these supply coming in, that's something they need to be concerned about. So I don't think the supply side is really much of an issue. There's a lot of both like formal hotels as well as other supplementary establishments that are coming in to cater to this need.
Right. Thank you very much, Travis, for joining us.